caught up in all the hype. And if Tupac came back from the dead now to hear this interview, he would agree. They got caught up.
Me and Pac went in the studio and did a song together. And then them little dudes.
Outlaws.
Yeah.
Outlaws.
They came, like, as soon as we got there, they came up to Pac talking about, yo, Lauryn Hill dissed you, Mobb Deep dissed you, this and that, and da. So then Pac went in the studio and started writing about, I think it might have been that, yeah, I think it was.
KRS-One is setting the record straight about Big Daddy Kane and Tupac's relationship. And it turns out a lot of what people think they know about these two isn't true. According to KRS-One, Kane and Tupac weren't enemies. In fact, they respected each other. So why does it feel like the industry tried to set them against one another? Well, you can thank Suge Knight for that. Everyone knows Suge loved to push narratives, control his artists, and make sure everyone took sides. East Coast versus West Coast drama sold records, sold magazines, and kept the cameras rolling. But Big Daddy Kane wasn't interested in playing the game. As for Tupac, he was caught up in it whether he liked it or not. And KRS-One hinted that if there was any tension between Kane and Tupac, it was more about manipulation than actual conflict. Kane was even approached to work with Death Row, but he passed. And that move alone made him part of a story he never asked to be a part of. But behind the scenes, there was mutual respect between Kane and Pac. There were unrecorded collaborations and conversations no one ever got to hear about. So let's dig into what really went down between these two.
Tupac is a lyricist. See what I'm saying? It's just that he's not one of those lyrical MCs that spit stuff, but his stuff is, he spit deep lyrics that touch your soul.
So back in the mid-90s, Suge Knight was expanding his empire with the creation of Death Row East. It was a strategic move to tap into the East Coast market. And who better to headline this expansion than one of the most respected lyricists from Brooklyn, Big Daddy Kane? Kane himself confirmed in interviews that he was approached with an offer of a $100,000 advance and a deal that could have been a game changer. But Kane had no interest in playing the industry's game. He turned it down, stating he wasn't about to be a part of that scene. And this move positioned him as a neutral party in the escalating East Coast-West Coast tensions.
Didn't Eric B try to sign you to Death Row East at one point?
Yeah.
What happened with that?
He called and said, Suge trying to, build a Death Row East, man. I think it might be a good look for you. So I went out there, and like when I walked in, these two big ass Rockwallers came, and then Suge, he comes out the back. They come running around, sniffing around me and stuff, sits down with his cigar, sits the cigar down and does this. And both the dogs ran and sat down next to him. So I'm like, okay, this one of them meetings. He said, well, what you want? A $400,000 advance. Why you ain't just simply say $500,000? Man, you Big Daddy Kane, man. I can't see myself signing you for less than $1 million. I gotta give you $1 million. He said, you already a household name. But then he was like, well, yo, look, I don't know how you doing financially, but if you want, I can just give you $100K in the morning. That's when I knew it was time to go. I was like, you just gonna give me $100,000 with no agreement? Nah, I was like, I'll let you know tomorrow. And then I went and switched my flight to like a 6 a.m. joint, got the fuck up.
Basically, Kane could sense something was off because nobody is ever going to give you that type of bread with no strings attached. He knew he was dealing with the devil and he didn't sell out. But this wasn't just about Kane. Kane's rejection of the Death Row East offer was also his refusal to be manipulated into a manufactured rivalry with Tupac. Despite Suge's plan to pit them against each other, Kane and Tupac had a surprisingly respectful relationship. KRS-One said multiple times in interviews that Kane never had beef with Tupac. In fact, he said that Kane and Pac had more in common than most rappers. But sadly, according to KRS-One, Tupac got caught up in the hype of the whole East Coast, West Coast drama.
The bottom line is that they got caught up in all the hype. And if Tupac came back from the dead now to hear this interview, he would agree. They got caught up in the hype. And Public Enemy prophesied, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. And they got caught up. Biggie, they all got caught up, and it's a shame because we ain't supposed to go out like that.
Now, Kane, on his part, recognized Tupac's talent from the jump, and he always defended him from critics who claimed Tupac wasn't a lyricist.
Right? You being a respected lyricist, how you feel about the people that push the narrative and say that Tupac, he wasn't a lyricist?
Okay, but hold up. Tupac is a lyricist. See what I'm saying? It's just that he's not one of those lyrical MCs that spit stuff, but his stuff is, he spit deep lyrics that touch your soul. So I do consider Tupac a lyricist. You know what I'm saying? Even though his stuff is about substance, I do consider him a lyricist, because it's like this here. You have to be lyrical to touch someone's soul, to make someone feel like, yo, I don't know this man, but he knows my pain. You see what I'm saying? So I do consider Tupac a lyricist. I would never, ever.
And then there's also the story of an unreleased track they recorded together, Wherever You Are, which never officially dropped. And whoever said Tupac isn't a lyricist needs to go listen to this track, because Pac held his own on that track with a living legend like Kane. But there's another thing that linked Big Daddy Kane and Tupac: their interest in the 5% Nation, also called the Nation of Gods and Earths. It's a movement that came out of Harlem in the 1960s, built around the idea that black people are the original people of the world, and that knowing yourself is everything. Basically, it's about knowledge, self-awareness, and empowerment. Kane got into it pretty early in the 80s, and it shows in a lot of his lyrics. He would weave in concepts like supreme mathematics and supreme alphabet, stuff that's meaningful if you know the background. But if not, it just makes his rhymes feel sharper and more thoughtful. Even in tracks like The Wrath of Kane, you can hear references to ideas from the 5% Nation.
The mathematics, you know, the 5% thing, you was kind of heavy in that, the knowledge itself. That was really woven into your rhymes when you first took off. When did you get introduced to that? Were you a 5%er, or was you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I believe that I was introduced. I want to say 81, 82, somewhere around there.
With this knowledge itself and knowing who you are. When you came in the game and during that era, man, knowing who you were and where you came from was important, man. You got a lot of that from the 5% Nation and your teachings, the first 120 and all that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you just said it, knowing who you are, you know. So, I mean, you know, when you study your lessons, you're learning your history, and you know, your rightful place in history, you know, and things of that nature. So that was something that was very informative and helped to you know, mold and shape me as a better person, I believe.
Now, as for Tupac, his connection to the 5% Nation was a bit different. He wasn't formally initiated, but he was exposed to the teachings when he was in Baltimore and through his mom, Afeni Shakur, a former Black Panther. He absorbed a lot of revolutionary ideas, and the themes of self-knowledge, empowerment, and fighting oppression show up in almost everything he did, from interviews to lyrics. So even though Kane and Tupac were on opposite coasts and the industry tried to make them enemies, they actually shared a lot in terms of philosophy and worldview, and that common ground gave them respect for each other. But here's where it gets really interesting. Suge Knight wasn't just a record label boss, he was a master of controlling narratives. Death Row Records was booming, and Suge knew that nothing sold records like drama. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry was the perfect marketing tool, and he wasn't shy about engineering it. Suge's plan with Kane was subtle but strategic. By approaching Kane with the Death Row East offer, he was essentially trying to drag a respected East Coast icon into the West Coast narrative. And Kane's refusal didn't just keep him out of the label deal, it also made him a wild card in the public's eyes. Suddenly, the media could spin Kane as someone not taking sides, while everyone else was caught up in the hype. And Suge had a way of making even neutrality seem like a statement.
You can't say it's an East Coast-West Coast rivalry, number one. People were starting to say it's an East Coast-West Coast rivalry because it was people that's trying to make money. It was true people trying to make careers, it was people trying to get famous. It was people hustling other people out of money on the East Coast. You don't have no team, you need us. We from the East Coast, pay us X amount of dollars for protection. And some of these idiots was doing it. For us, how we looked at it is, we looked at it as we representing the West Coast, but we representing the ghetto.
Now, Tupac, he didn't have the luxury of staying out of the game. Once he signed with Death Row, he was Suge's flagship artist, and the East Coast-West Coast feud became part of his brand. Magazines, TV shows, and radio, they all played into it. And while Tupac was outspoken and fiery by nature, much of the tension he experienced with other East Coast artists was amplified, and sometimes even directly manufactured by label interests. And KRS-One knew this. That's why he refused to play the industry games, and he continued to call out the industry's exploitation of black artists.
This place, this institution can never side with, come under, understand the exploitation of our culture. Never will you ever see me standing in the environment where our culture is being exploited. Or if you do see me there, the next moment this thing's gonna fall, I'm there to bring this shit down. If you see me in a situation like that, you should say, yo, watch out. Something's about to happen. Turn your cameras on. Something's about to go down. Why is Chris here? Why is he here? Something's about to, he gonna say some shit right now that is gonna,
But see, Suge wasn't working alone to push that East Coast versus West Coast rivalry. The record industry in the 90s had multiple layers of influence. Executives, A&R reps, and even media outlets had financial incentives to push the rival narrative. Album sales, magazine covers, and TV ratings all spiked when there was conflict. And in some cases, artists were pressured to take shots at one another, or their words were edited and presented to make it look like feuds existed where they didn't. Kane and Tupac were prime examples of this. Both were skilled, respected lyricists with strong personal philosophies, and their actual interactions were respectful. Yet the industry narrative made it seem like the opposite. Suge and his allies knew that fans eating up conflict would keep them buying records and following the drama, and they were happy to stage manage it. But this wasn't unique to Suge or Death Row. East Coast labels like Bad Boy and other industry executives played their part too, fueling the rivalry on their side. But Suge had the most visibility and the most aggressive approach, often leveraging fear, loyalty, and street credibility to maintain control over his artists and the narrative.
All of that happened afterwards was a ploy, and it was manufactured by Suge Knight.
When you say ploy, I don't know what a ploy means.
Here's the thing.
It was a game plan.
Right.
It was a game plan to get him
so
to go over there.
It was a strategy.
So if you think about back then, Tupac got convicted of rape, he went to jail. That sucker Kevin Powell did an interview for Vibe. With Tupac.
The writer, Kevin Powell.
The light-skinned guy, I know him. And Tupac said, Thug Life is dead. He said, I might be killed after this interview, but I want my truth to be known, right? And he's doing the interview, right? Suge Knight goes to get him out of jail.
Yeah.
When Suge Knight got him out of jail, it's the first time you heard Biggie and Puff did it. That whole East Coast, West Coast shit was manufactured by Suge. Suge did that shit.
But you're not the shooting. You're saying that.
No. I'm talking about
Okay. Just to be
the
clear.
blaming of Puff and Big.
Yeah.
And Tupac, with his explosive temper, became the perfect instrument for this strategy. Kane, on the other hand, was more cautious and refused to be a pawn. But even his refusal became a part of the story that the media twisted into something it wasn't. And while fans and media focused on manufactured beef, the industry quietly continued its larger business deals, controlling artists' contracts, taking cuts from collaborations, and pushing albums. The East Coast-West Coast feud sold more than music. It sold attention, hype, and influence. Suge and other executives understood that controlling perception was as profitable as controlling record sales.
That's a problem with Death Row and Suge Knight and Snoop and Tupac against me. It's a war. That's the most craziest thing I ever heard of in my life. I get no stripes for slapping a female. I don't hit women. Or I'm a prayer in the week. So how I'm a war with a guy who ain't no man? I don't have nothing against nobody out there who doing their thing. You doing your thing, you do it. But don't do an interview and say, well, the biggest war is between Death Row and my company. Death Row on a whole nother level. If they had a problem with us, we don't have a problem with nobody. Everybody know where we at 24/7. Either at the studio or at the office. If there's an event going on, we're gonna be the first ones in the front row having fun. At the Super Bowl, we're gonna be there betting and cheering. So we're not the one hiding. There's a lot of people who make up like stories to try to get themselves famous. Like get themselves some yellow power. That's the wrong way to do it. If you're gonna do it right. If you're gonna be with Death Row, Add one of these.
And this is why the story of Kane and Tupac is so important. It's a reminder that the history we read about hip-hop isn't always the whole truth. Suge and the executives backing the industry narrative benefited from the chaos, while the artists themselves were caught in the middle.
The East Coast, West Coast thing, it just got out of control. Dudes was getting killed, and I felt responsible. But I couldn't stop it.
We ain't mad at the whole spot in New York, we just mad at certain people. I got this new project coming out along with some other brothers called One Nation, and it's like an East Coast, West Coast collaboration to kill this whole new vibe everybody want to be on about it being a war between the East Coast and the West Coast.
Right.
It's really just a problem with two rappers. And the East Coast, West Coast thing is something that the journalists and people are making just to get paid off it so it can drag out and everybody can have albums. They're perpetuating it so it could be drama. When it all go down, don't look at me and Biggie and be like, why is there a big East Coast, West Coast war when you're shooting this to 300 homes, 300 countries, telling them about an East Coast, West Coast war that they would never know exists. So that's where information becomes a problem. We both need to exercise greater restraint.
So when you look back at the 90s, it's clear that the East Coast-West Coast war wasn't just about two coasts or two crews. It was a carefully constructed drama, with Suge as one of the key directors pulling strings behind the scenes. Kane and Tupac didn't fit neatly into that script, which is why their real connection rarely gets talked about. Well, let me know your thoughts on Kane and Tupac's bond. And how do you feel about this theory that Suge and other puppet masters in the industry manufactured this East Coast versus West Coast beef for profit? Drop your comments below, and I'll catch you in this next video.